Either you work, or you're out on the street, my daughter said, her voice flat, almost bored, as if she were talking about taking out the trash instead of speaking to her own mother. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I didn't ask her to repeat herself. I simply looked down at my plate and folded my napkin slowly, the way I had done for decades at family dinners. Then I stood up and left the table without saying a word. I'm glad you're here. Stay with my story until the end and let me know the city you're watching from. I never imagined I would be telling this story at my age, but life has a way of stripping things down to their truth. It had been 3 months since my husband passed away. 38 years of marriage ended quietly in a hospital room that smelled like disinfectant and stale coffee. After the funeral, people went back to their lives. Cards stopped coming. The phone stopped ringing. And somehow, without anyone announcing it, I became a problem that needed to be solved. That dinner took place in the house I had lived in for over 20 years. Same oak table. Same ceiling fan with the soft clicking sound my husband always meant to fix. I had cooked that night, even though my hands still shook sometimes when I held a knife. Meatloaf. Mashed potatoes. Simple food. Familiar food. I thought routine might help us all feel normal again. My daughter sat across from me, scrolling through her phone between bites. She didn't ask how I was sleeping. She didn't mention her father. When she finally looked up, her eyes were sharp, calculating. That was when she said it. Work or leave. She said it like she had been rehearsing, like this conversation had already happened in her head, and I was just late to the meeting. I excused myself and went to my bedroom. I closed the door and sat on the edge of the bed I used to share with my husband. His pillow was still there. I hadn't moved it yet. I stared at the dresser, at the small framed photo of us taken years ago at a county fair. We were both smiling, sunburned, holding paper cups of lemonade. Back then, I believed family was permanent. I didn't cry that night. Grief had already taken most of my tears. What settled in instead was something heavier. A quiet realization that losing my husband wasn't the only loss I was facing. The next morning, I noticed small things. My coat moved from the hallway closet to the garage, my mail stacked neatly on the counter instead of my usual spot by the lamp. Subtle changes. Territorial changes. I understood the message even when it wasn't spoken. I was 67 years old. My joints ached in the mornings. My back stiffened if I stood too long. But I wasn't helpless. I had worked before. I had raised a child, I had paid bills, balanced checkbooks, held a family together through layoffs, illnesses, and lean years. Somehow, none of that mattered now. At breakfast, my daughter talked about expenses, utilities, groceries. Everyone has to contribute, she said, without looking at me. The word everyone hung in the air, but we both knew who she meant. I nodded. I washed my plate. I thanked her for letting me stay. Inside, something shifted. I realized then that I was no longer being seen as a mother, or even as family. I had been reduced to a line item, a cost, a burden to be managed. And in that moment, I made a decision. I would not beg. I would not argue. And I would not show my hand too soon. Because when people think you are weak, they stop watching you closely. The house felt different after that night. Not louder, not quieter, just colder. Like something essential had been turned off and forgotten. I woke up early the next morning, the way I always had when my husband was alive. Old habits don't disappear just because someone does. The sun was barely up, casting a thin line of light across the kitchen floor. I made coffee for one, though my hand still reached for a second mug before I stopped myself. His chair at the table remained empty. I avoided looking at it for too long. I moved through the house carefully as if I were a guest instead of someone who had lived there for years. I folded the blanket I used on the couch and placed it neatly in the corner. I wiped down the counter even though it was already clean. I wanted there to be no excuse, no complaint that I was in the way. My daughter left early for work. She didn't say goodbye. The door closed with a firm click that echoed longer than it should have. I stood in the hallway for a moment, listening to the silence that followed. After my husband died, I thought grief would be the hardest part. The nights, the memories, the sudden urge to tell him something and realizing there was no one to hear it. I was wrong. Grief was familiar. It came with rules. This was something else entirely. By mid-morning, I noticed my things slowly disappearing from shared spaces. My shoes were lined up against the garage wall instead of by the door. The framed photo of my wedding day was moved from the living room shelf to the bottom drawer of a side table. Nothing was thrown away. Nothing dramatic, just quietly relocated. It reminded me of how hospitals move patients who are no longer critical. Still alive, just no longer a priority. I sat in my room and went through old papers. Insurance statements, bank letters, documents my husband insisted we keep copies of, just in case. I hadn't looked at them since the funeral. At the time, I wasn't ready. Now I was. In the afternoon, my daughter returned home and spoke to me from the doorway. She mentioned job listings she'd seen online. Retail, grocery stores, part-time cleaning work. She spoke quickly, efficiently, like a manager outlining expectations. I nodded. I said I would look into it. She seemed relieved, as if cooperation was all she needed from me. That evening, I reheated leftovers and ate alone. I listened to her talking on the phone in the next room, laughing. Life moving forward without hesitation, without me in it. Later, I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling fan turning slowly above me. My body was tired, but my mind was clear. For the first time since my husband's passing, I wasn't numb. I understood something then. This wasn't about money, or work, or space. This was about control. And control only works when the other person believes they have none. I closed my eyes and made another quiet decision. I would keep playing the role they expected. The grieving widow, the aging mother, the woman with nowhere else to go. Because as long as they believed that, they would keep underestimating me, and that was exactly what I needed. The changes became harder to ignore after that. My daughter stopped asking me questions. She told me things instead. What time dinner would be, where I should put my groceries, which cabinet I could use. Her tone wasn't angry. It was administrative, as if my presence had been reduced to a checklist she needed to manage efficiently. One afternoon, I came home from a short walk to find my bedroom door open. She was inside, holding a box. My box. Family letters, old birthday cards, things I hadn't touched in years. "I'm just reorganizing," she said quickly. "We need more space." I smiled and told her it was fine. She seemed surprised by how easily I agreed. That night, I noticed the lock on the filing drawer downstairs had been changed, the one my husband used to keep household documents in. I didn't mention it. I didn't ask for the key. I simply memorized the detail and moved on. Small things added up. The thermostat adjusted without asking me. My name removed from the shared calendar on the fridge. Conversations about plans that didn't include me, even when I was sitting right there. She spoke about me in the third person when friends visited. She's still figuring things out. She's not sure what she wants to do yet. As if I weren't capable of deciding anything on my own. One evening, while clearing the table, I overheard her on the phone in the other room. Her voice was low, confident. She was talking about timelines, about how long it would take, about options. "She'll understand eventually," she said. "She doesn't really have a choice." I stood at the sink with my hands in soapy water and listened without reacting. I dried the dishes carefully and put them away. Later, in my room, I sat on the bed and thought about the woman I used to be. The one who worked double shifts when money was tight. The one who stayed up late helping with school projects. The one who taught her daughter how to balance a checkbook and cook a proper meal. I wondered when that woman stopped being worth listening to. The next morning, my daughter slid a piece of paper across the counter. Job listings, circled in pen, all entry-level, all physically demanding. "These are realistic," she said, "given your age." I thanked her. I folded the paper neatly and placed it in my purse. She watched me closely then, as if waiting for resistance. When none came, she relaxed. That was when I understood her mistake. She thought silence meant surrender. In reality, I was paying attention. To everything. I started noticing patterns, which bills she handled, which mail she opened first, which conversations made her nervous. I noticed how quickly she shut down any mention of my husband's name, how uncomfortable she became when finances came up. At night, I began reviewing what I still remembered. Account numbers, names, dates. Conversations from years ago that suddenly felt important. I didn't rush. I didn't confront her. Because I knew something she didn't. People who push you too hard often assume you have nowhere to stand. They rarely check to see if the ground beneath them is solid. And I had lived long enough to know that patience, when used correctly, is not weakness at all. That night, I dreamed about my husband for the first time since the funeral. He was standing in the kitchen, the way he used to after work, loosening his tie, asking what was for dinner. In the dream, the house was warm again, lived in, safe. When I woke up, the ache in my chest felt sharper than usual. I spent the morning going through memories instead of papers. I remembered the early years of our marriage, when money was tight and the house was small. How he used to say, half joking, "As long as we have each other, we're fine." I remembered how seriously he took responsibility. Not just for me, but for our child, for the roof over our heads, for the future. He never made decisions without talking to me first. When our daughter was born, he held her carefully like she might break. He promised out loud that we would always protect her, that we would give her stability. What he didn't say but showed every day was that we would protect each other too. For years, we worked as a unit. Bills paid together. Plans made together. Even after he retired, he insisted on reviewing everything with me. "You should always know where things stand," he used to say, just in case. I didn't realize then how much those words would matter. After he died, people treated me differently. Neighbors spoke more slowly. Friends checked in less often. My daughter stopped asking for my opinion altogether. It was as if his absence had erased my authority. I thought about the last conversation we had before he went into the hospital. He squeezed my hand and told me not to worry, that everything was taken care of, that I would be fine. At the time, I believed he meant emotionally. Now, I wondered if he meant something else. That afternoon, I pulled out an old notebook from the back of my dresser, the one where I used to jot things down when my husband asked me to remember something important. Addresses, names, notes in my own handwriting. I flipped through it slowly. There were reminders about meetings with his financial advisor, notes about accounts we didn't use often, a line I barely remembered writing, "Don't forget, check drawer, blue folder." I stared at that sentence for a long time. Downstairs, I could hear my daughter moving around, talking on the phone again. Her voice carried that same confident tone, the one she used when she believed she was in control. I didn't interrupt her. I waited until the house was quiet before I went downstairs. I opened the drawer she never touched, the one she probably didn't even know existed. Inside were things she had overlooked, old but not useless, forgotten but not irrelevant. I closed the drawer carefully and went back to my room. That night, my daughter knocked on my door and asked if I had applied for any jobs yet. I told her I was working on it. She nodded, satisfied, and reminded me about expenses again. I thanked her. She left thinking the conversation had gone exactly the way she wanted. Lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling and felt something settle inside me. A calm I hadn't felt since before my husband died. I realized then that she had underestimated two things. First, how much I remembered, and second, how well my husband had prepared me. I wasn't lost. I wasn't helpless. I was simply being underestimated. And that I knew was going to change everything. By the fifth day, I understood the pattern clearly. My daughter wasn't reacting out of grief or stress. This wasn't confusion or poor communication. This was planning. Quiet, deliberate planning that had started long before my husband passed away. I began noticing how often she referenced money now, how quickly conversations turned toward costs, budgets, and what made sense. She spoke as if she were the only adult in the room, as if I had never managed a household or made a decision in my life. One morning, she handed me a list. Groceries she expected me to buy myself. Items I was no longer welcome to use from the shared pantry. She explained it calmly, like it was reasonable, like it was fair. "You understand," she said. "Everyone has to pull their weight." I nodded. I always nodded. What she didn't realize was that I had pulled my weight for decades. I had carried this family through years she barely remembered. I had stayed up nights balancing bills when my husband's work slowed down. I had taken extra shifts when she needed tuition money. I had postponed doctor visits so she could have braces, summer camps, a better start. None of that was listed anywhere now. Later that afternoon, I overheard her talking to a friend. They were laughing. I wasn't meant to hear it. "She's still here," my daughter said. "But not for long. I just need to push a little harder." Push. Like I was an object. like I could be moved if enough pressure was applied. I stood still and listened until the conversation ended. Then I returned to my room and closed the door gently. That evening, I went through more of my old notes. Things I had once considered unimportant. Dates, names, conversations I remembered but never thought I'd need again. Patterns began to form. I remembered how my daughter had insisted on handling certain paperwork after my husband's death. How she volunteered quickly, confidently. How relieved I felt at the time to let someone else take over while I grieved. Now I saw it differently. She hadn't stepped in to help me. She had stepped in to replace me. At dinner, she talked about future plans, renovations, changes, what the house could become. She spoke as if I wouldn't be part of it, as if my presence was temporary, an inconvenience that would soon resolve itself. I ate quietly and excused myself early. In my room, I sat on the edge of the bed and thought about everything I had given, not just financially, but emotionally. The years of patience, of forgiveness, of putting her needs first, even when it cost me. I realized then that this wasn't about survival for her. It was about ownership. She wanted control. Over the house, over the narrative, over me. And she believed I was too tired, too old, too broken to notice. She was wrong. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. Not because things were improving, but because I finally understood the situation clearly. You can't protect yourself from something you refuse to name. And now I knew exactly what I was dealing with. This wasn't neglect. It was a quiet eviction in progress, and I was done pretending I didn't see it. By the end of that week, the pressure became more direct. My daughter stopped pretending this was temporary. She started setting deadlines, not written down, not formal, but spoken with intention. Casual sentences meant to sound reasonable. "You should really start earning something by next month," she said one morning while pouring herself coffee. "I can't keep covering everything." I didn't remind her that I had covered everything for years. I didn't mention the checks I'd written, the emergencies I'd handled quietly. I simply nodded and thanked her for letting me know. She mistook my calm for agreement. That afternoon, she asked where I planned to work. She suggested places again, more firmly this time, jobs that required standing for long hours, lifting, smiling at strangers all day. She framed it as motivation. "It's good for you," she said, "keeps you busy." Busy, as if my life had been empty before she decided it was. I noticed she had started counting groceries, marking items mentally. She commented if I cooked something she hadn't planned for. She mentioned utility bills more often, reminding me how expensive everything was. Each comment landed like a small push toward the door. One evening she brought up living arrangements. "If this gets too hard," she said carefully, "there are other options. Smaller places. Shared spaces. You don't need much." I looked at her and smiled. I told her I would think about it. She leaned back in her chair, relieved. To her, that smile meant progress. It meant compliance. That night, I didn't sleep much. Not because I was anxious, but because my mind was working. Sorting through memories, details, and conversations I had once dismissed, I replayed moments when my husband had insisted on doing things a certain way. Times I'd rolled my eyes and said he worried too much. He hadn't been worrying. He had been preparing. The next day, I began moving differently, not physically, but emotionally. I stopped shrinking. I stopped apologizing for small things. I still kept my voice soft, but I paid attention to my footing, to my posture, to what I allowed myself to internalize. My daughter noticed the change, even if she didn't understand it. She watched me more closely, asked more questions. Her confidence flickered slightly. "Are you okay?" She asked one evening. "You seem different." I told her I was fine, that I was adjusting. That answer didn't satisfy her the way it used to. A few days later, she reminded me again of her condition, work or leave. This time, she said it with less patience, less politeness. The words carried an edge. I listened without interrupting. When she finished, I nodded once and said I understood. She didn't see the shift in my eyes, or maybe she did and chose to ignore it. What she didn't realize was that something had changed permanently. I was no longer reacting. I was observing. She believed she was tightening control. In reality, she was revealing her strategy, showing her hand piece by piece. And with every push, every demand, every careless sentence, she made one mistake she couldn't undo. She reminded me that I had nothing to lose. And people who believe that about you often forget one thing. When you stop fearing loss, you become very dangerous to underestimate. The call came on a quiet afternoon, just as I was folding laundry in my room. The phone rang once, stopped, then rang again. A landline number, one I didn't recognize. I let it ring longer than usual before answering. "Mrs. Carter?" a woman asked. Her voice was calm, professional, not rushed. "Yes," I said. "This is Helen Brooks. I worked with your husband years ago. We met once briefly. I wasn't sure if you'd remember me." I didn't at first, but I told her that was all right. She hesitated before continuing. "I hope I'm not calling at a bad time. I've been meaning to reach out since I heard about your husband's passing." I thanked her. We spoke for a moment about him, about how kind he'd been, how careful, the kind of man who checked details twice and trusted slowly. Then her tone shifted. "There's something I need to ask you," she said. "Have you spoken to anyone about your financial arrangements yet?" I paused. I told her I was handling things gradually. She was quiet for a second. "Did your daughter mention contacting an advisor?" The question landed heavier than it sounded. I told her my daughter had been helping with paperwork. "That's what I thought," Helen said gently. "Your husband asked me to keep an eye on certain things, just in case. He worried about misunderstandings." Misunderstandings. She asked if we could meet. Somewhere public, somewhere quiet. I didn't tell my daughter about the call. We met 2 days later at a small cafe near the library. Helen was around my age. Practical clothes. Clear eyes. She didn't waste time. She asked me what I knew, what had been said, what I had been shown. I answered honestly. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't defend anyone. Helen listened carefully. Then she took out a folder. Inside were copies, not originals, but enough to matter. Notes, instructions, a timeline written in my husband's handwriting. References to accounts and documents I hadn't thought about in years. "He was very specific," she said. "He didn't want you overwhelmed. He assumed things would be handled respectfully." I almost laughed at that word. Helen didn't smile. "He trusted you," she continued, "but he also trusted that you would need support if that trust was broken." She explained things slowly. What I had access to. What could not be changed without my consent. What steps had already been taken without my knowledge. My hands stayed steady as I listened. When I returned home, my daughter was in the kitchen. She asked where I'd been. I told her I'd gone for a walk and stopped for coffee. She nodded, uninterested. That evening she spoke again about plans, about timelines, about how things would be easier once I figured something out. I agreed. I told her I appreciated her patience. Later, alone in my room, I sat on the bed and opened my notebook again. This time, I added names, dates, one new phone number. I finally understood why my husband had insisted on redundancy, on backups, on people outside the family. He hadn't been paranoid. He had been realistic. The next morning, my daughter reminded me of her condition one more time. Work or leave. I looked at her and smiled. "I know," I said softly, and for the first time it wasn't an act, because I wasn't alone anymore. And she wasn't the only one who knew the truth. The house felt smaller once I knew what I knew. Not physically. The walls didn't move. The room stayed the same. But the illusion of shared space was gone. Every hallway felt like a boundary. Every conversation felt staged. I started noticing how my daughter watched me now. Not casually, like before. Carefully. As if she sensed something had shifted but couldn't identify what it was. She asked more questions. Where I was going. Who I talked to. How long I planned to be out. Her voice stayed polite, but the curiosity behind it wasn't. I gave her nothing extra. One afternoon, I overheard her on the phone again. This time, she didn't lower her voice fast enough. "She's still dragging her feet," she said. "But it won't matter. She won't fight it." I paused in the hallway and listened. "I've already looked into options," she continued. "Once she's working, or once she leaves, everything gets easier." Everything. I walked back to my room quietly and closed the door. I sat on the bed and replayed the last few weeks in my mind. The deadlines, the lists, the job suggestions, the subtle pressure disguised as concern. It was all part of the same plan. She didn't want me independent. She wanted me exhausted, working just enough to feel grateful for whatever scraps of stability she allowed, or gone entirely, so she wouldn't have to pretend anymore. That evening, she brought up paperwork again, asked if I'd found my identification documents, suggested we should organize everything together. I told her I would look for them later. She frowned slightly. just for a moment. After dinner, I went through my purse and checked the folded job listings. Still there, unchanged. A prop in a play she believed I was rehearsing for. I didn't apply to a single one. Instead, I reviewed what Helen had shown me. I read the notes again, slowly, carefully. I didn't rush to conclusions. I verified details in my own memory, cross-checked timelines, everything lined up. The next morning, my daughter announced she would be meeting someone about the house soon. Just exploring possibilities, she said. Testing my reaction. I wished her luck and asked if she wanted coffee. That confused her. She expected fear, resistance, pleading. Instead, she got calm, and calm made her uneasy. That night, I slept deeply. No dreams, no restless thoughts. Just a steady certainty settling in my chest. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't being sensitive. I wasn't overreacting. I was being pushed out. Quietly. Systematically. With a smile. And now that I saw it clearly, I stopped pretending it wasn't happening. The next phase wasn't about surviving her pressure. It was about choosing the right moment. Because plans like hers only work when the other person panics. And I wasn't panicking. I was waiting. Waiting for her to believe she had already won. Waiting for her to make the mistake people always make when they underestimate someone who stays quiet for too long. The house was still mine. The truth was still mine. And very soon, the timing would be too. By the following week, I began preparing quietly. Not in ways anyone could see. I didn't pack bags or make calls in front of my daughter. I didn't change my routine. On the surface, nothing was different. That was important. I woke up early, as usual. I made coffee. I cleaned up after myself. I spoke politely. I stayed out of the way. I let her believe the pressure was working. But inside, everything was changing. I started organizing my thoughts the same way I used to organize our household when money was tight. One step at a time. No emotion, just clarity. I wrote things down in my notebook at night after the house went quiet. Dates, words she had used, timelines she had mentioned without realizing I was listening. I remembered something my husband once said during a difficult year. Never move when someone else is pushing you. Move when you choose. That sentence stayed with me. I began gathering what I needed without drawing attention. Personal documents I still had access to. Items that mattered to me, not because of value, but because of memory. I didn't take much. I didn't rush. I didn't make it obvious. During the day, my daughter grew more confident. She talked about the future more openly now. She spoke about space, about independence, about how this situation couldn't last forever. She said my name less often. She referred to me as Mom. Only when others were around. When it was just us, she spoke as if I were already halfway gone. One afternoon, she handed me another printed page. A list of apartments. Small ones. Far from where I had lived for years. She said it was just in case. I thanked her and placed the paper neatly on my dresser. She watched me carefully, searching my face for signs of panic. When she didn't find any, she frowned. That evening, she reminded me again that she needed a decision soon. Her voice was firm now. No softness left. I can't do this forever, she said. I need to know what you're going to do. I told her I understood. She nodded, satisfied. That night, I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling. I thought about the woman I had been before all this, the one who avoided conflict, the one who smoothed things over, the one who always chose peace, even when it cost her something. That woman had kept the family together for a long time, but she wasn't the woman I needed to be anymore. The next morning, I noticed something important. My daughter stopped checking on me. She stopped hovering. She stopped asking questions. In her mind, the outcome was decided. She believed I was cornered, and people who believe they've already won grow careless. I used that time to double-check what I knew. I went over details Helen had shared. I matched them with my own memories. Nothing conflicted. Nothing was missing. I felt calm, steady. Not angry, not afraid, resolved. I realized then that this wasn't about revenge or proving a point. It was about dignity, about choosing not to disappear quietly just because someone else found it convenient. My daughter had given me a deadline. She didn't realize I had been setting one of my own. And when the moment came, I wouldn't need to raise my voice. I would only need to stand my ground, because everything she thought I didn't have. Time, leverage, a way out. I had been holding on to all along. The moment came sooner than I expected. It was a Saturday morning. Quiet. No work schedules to hide behind. No phone calls to interrupt. My daughter sat at the kitchen table with her laptop open, scrolling through something that looked official. She didn't look up when she spoke. "I need to know what you've decided," she said. "I can't keep waiting." I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat across from her. I didn't rush. I didn't apologize. I didn't soften my posture. She glanced up then, briefly. Impatient. "I found a place," she continued. "It's not far, but it's affordable. This can be done quickly if you cooperate." Cooperate. I set my cup down carefully. The sound was small, but it seemed louder than usual. "I won't be going anywhere today," I said. She frowned. "That's not what we discussed." I met her eyes calmly. "We didn't discuss anything. You told me what you wanted." Her jaw tightened. "You can't stay here without contributing. I've been very clear." I nodded. "You have." She leaned back in her chair, exasperated. "Then what is your plan?" That was the moment, the one I had been waiting for. I reached into my bag and placed a folder on the table between us. I didn't push it toward her. I didn't open it. I simply let it sit there. Her eyes dropped to it immediately. "What's that?" she asked. "Information," I said. "The kind you should have asked about before setting deadlines." She hesitated, then opened the folder. I watched her expression change as she scanned the first page. Confusion first, then disbelief. "That's not," she began. "Keep reading," I said. Her fingers moved faster now, pages flipped. Her breathing changed. The confidence drained from her face, replaced by something tighter, sharper. "Where did you get this?" she asked. "I've always had access," I replied. "I just didn't need it until now." She looked up at me, searching for something. Fear, weakness, panic. She didn't find it. "This doesn't mean what you think it means," she said quickly. "We can still—" "I know exactly what it means," I interrupted gently, "and so do you." The room felt still. Even the refrigerator seemed quieter. I stood up slowly. "You gave me two options," I said. "Work or leave." I picked up my bag and slung it over my shoulder. "I've chosen neither." Her mouth opened, but no words came out. "I'm not moving," I continued, "and I'm not explaining myself anymore." She stared at the folder as if it might disappear. "You should have talked to me," I said, "instead of managing me." I walked toward the hallway, then stopped. "Oh," I added, without turning around, "we'll be having a different conversation next week, with someone else present." Her chair scraped loudly as she stood. "You can't just—" I turned then, calm, steady. "I can," I said, and I just did. I went to my room and closed the door behind me. For the first time since my husband died, I felt something close to balance return. The power she thought she had been tightening around me had slipped from her hands, and she finally understood what I had known all along. Silence doesn't mean surrender. Sometimes it means preparation. The house was different after that morning. Not tense, not loud, just strained, like a held breath that refused to release. My daughter avoided me for the rest of the day. She stayed in her room, doors closed, phone calls taken in whispers. When she did pass me in the hallway, she didn't meet my eyes. The authority she used to carry so comfortably was gone, replaced by irritation and something else she wasn't ready to name. That evening, she tried again. She stood in the doorway of my room, arms crossed, posture defensive. "We need to talk," she said. I was sitting on the bed, folding a sweater. I didn't look up right away. I finished what I was doing, placed it neatly in the drawer, and then faced her. "I'm listening," I said. Her tone softened, but it wasn't genuine. "You blindsided me," she said. "You should have told me what you were planning." I shook my head slightly. "I wasn't planning anything," I replied. "I was responding." She scoffed. "You made me look like the bad guy." I met her gaze. "You did that yourself." She stepped into the room, frustration rising. "You can't just change everything like this. I was trying to manage a situation." "You were trying to control one," I said calmly. She opened her mouth to argue, then stopped. The words didn't come as easily now. That folder on the table had changed the rules. She knew it. So did I. "I did what I thought was best," she said finally. "For you?" I replied. Silence stretched between us. She looked smaller then. Not younger. Smaller. The confidence that once filled her movements was gone, replaced by calculation. She was rethinking everything, rewriting the story in her head. "You're still my responsibility," she said, grasping for ground. I stood up slowly. "I stopped being your responsibility the moment you gave me an ultimatum." Her face hardened. "So what happens now?" I considered the question carefully. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because I chose my words deliberately. Now, I said, we stop pretending. She didn't respond. The following days were quiet. Too quiet. She stopped mentioning work, stopped bringing up apartments, stopped reminding me of expenses. Instead, she watched, waited, tried to regain her footing without admitting she'd lost it. A few days later, the meeting happened. She sat stiffly at the table while Helen spoke. Professional, clear, direct, no accusations. Just facts, timelines, boundaries. What could and could not be done without my consent. My daughter barely spoke. When it was over, she looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time. Not as a dependent, not as an inconvenience, as an obstacle. I didn't think you'd push back, she said quietly after Helen left. I wasn't pushing, I replied. I was standing. That night, I slept in my bed without fear for the first time in months. No deadlines, no pressure, no whispered plans in the next room. In the morning, I made breakfast and ate it slowly. I didn't rush, I didn't shrink. I moved through the house the way I always had before, like I belonged there. Because I did. My daughter watched me from across the kitchen. There was distance now, but also something else. Respect. Not the warm kind, the reluctant kind. The kind that comes when someone realizes they can't erase you as easily as they thought. I didn't need apologies. I didn't need explanations. All I needed was what I had finally reclaimed, my place, my voice, and the quiet understanding that I was no longer at anyone's mercy. Not even my own child. The house settled into a new rhythm after that. Not warmer, not friendlier, but honest. My daughter no longer gave me instructions disguised as concern. She stopped counting my groceries. She stopped suggesting places I should go. When she spoke to me now, it was measured, careful, as if she were choosing each word with intention instead of assumption. We existed in the same space, but the rules had changed. I moved through the house without shrinking. I made coffee when I wanted. I sat where I pleased. I kept my door open, not out of politeness, but because I no longer felt the need to hide. No one was waiting to push me out. One afternoon, I stood in the living room and looked at the walls, at the small marks where furniture had once stood, at the photos that had been taken down and quietly put back up. The house hadn't changed. I had. Grief doesn't disappear just because you reclaim your footing. I still missed my husband every day. I still reached for him in quiet moments. But the fear that had followed his death, the fear of becoming invisible, was gone. I understood something then that I hadn't before. Losing him didn't make me weak. It revealed who around me already believed I was. My daughter and I never had a dramatic reconciliation. There were no apologies spoken aloud, no emotional speeches. But something unspoken settled between us. A boundary. Clear. Solid. She knew now that I wasn't something to manage. And I knew something else just as important. I didn't need her permission to exist with dignity. Weeks later, I went through my notebook one last time. I closed it and placed it back in the drawer. I didn't need it anymore. The work it helped me do was finished. One evening, as I prepared dinner, my daughter paused in the doorway. "You're not leaving," she said. Not as a question. "No," I replied gently. "I'm not." She nodded once and walked away. That was enough. I never did take one of those jobs she circled. Not because I couldn't work, but because I refused to let fear make my choices for me. I chose stability. I chose clarity. I chose myself. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Silence doesn't mean agreement. Calm doesn't mean surrender. And age does not erase worth. Sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can do, especially when she's expected to disappear quietly, is stay exactly where she is and refuse to be moved. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't beg. I didn't fight the way they expected me to. I simply stood my ground. And in doing so, I reclaimed more than a house. I reclaimed my name, my place, and the certainty that no one, child or otherwise, gets to decide when my life stops mattering. Not now. Not ever.